2024 is going to be a great year for geospatial, just like 2023 was. And if you haven't seen my other video and made it here on your own, you can check that out, which wraps up my best things in geospatial in 2023. So go ahead and check that out and then come back to this video or whatever order you want. It really doesn't matter. Anyways, so I have 4 big things that I'm going to watch out for as trends moving into this next year for geospatial and modern GIS. The first one is looking at these comprehensive geospatial or modern geospatial platforms. I think we're starting to see some of those really start to come together and be used both in the open source and the cloud or proprietary space as well. A lot of the cloud providers, like I mentioned in my last video, are starting to get more complete toolkits, things for databases and imagery. Of course, the cloud optimized file storage types are really starting to come together, and we're seeing this formation of what you could call the modern geospatial data stack. I've talked a little bit about the modern data stack and how that relates to geospatial in a webinar with Cardo. I'll put the link in the description if you want to check that out. It's a full hour long, but I think well worth a watch there. But here's the kind of like simple architecture that I put together on what the modern geospatial data stack might look like. And I think you'll start to see this start to round out as a mix of open tools and maybe proprietary tools and a mix of both of those, but really centered around performance and scalability and using interoperability in local settings with things like maybe DuckDB and the cloud file storage types. And then as you need to, you can migrate those parts of your workloads to the cloud that you need to. So it gives you this really strong element of choice and things like that. But people start to build these really comprehensive, deep cloud platforms that work together. And we start to see that even with tools like LeafMap that allow you to connect out these different places. The Apache Sedona ecosystem kind of trying to be the Databricks of geospatial with Wherebots and Apache Sedona and the Spark ecosystem. And then finally things like Cardo. Now I do work for Cardo, but we've kind of been looking at this space and trying to see it evolve over years. But I think you're starting to see these really comprehensive cloud toolkits really start to take shape. So I think we have to watch this space to see how cloud and geospatial really start to evolve over the next year. I'll be talking a little bit more about that and some of the ways that you can kind of prepare with different languages or different file types and some of these different things over the course of the next year. So definitely check that out. Now, like I said, I can't mention sort of this new world without any talking like generative AI and ChatGPT and all these different tools. So I think it's time we might as well talk about that a little bit as well. And I think 2024 will be the year that we see some of the first novel geospatial generative AI models. Now, there's really 2 that I think fall into that category. What I define as like a novel model is not just something that you're like running a process in ChatGPT or using the GPT or Google APIs to run generative AI workflows and then do something with that, but really something that is a base net new model that is specific to things like in geospatial that you're training or advancing. So the 2 that I count are the IBM NASA model that actually uses, instead of text on the internet, imagery that you can actually use to train and use massive amounts of imagery data to train these models to do, land type detection or do different sort of predictions or fire, whatever you sort of want from that. You can kind of generate and have it scan these new images based off of a ton of imagery that's changed. And of course, there's just massive computing power behind this, but you can see this demo here that looks just really amazing to see what it can actually do. I see that's something to look out for, is these like imagery models trained as generative AI models. I think that could be really, really cool and powerful, and see that evolve over the coming year. The second is this like sort of geo AI model. I think it's been developed by the University of South Carolina and some others. I'll put all their names up here so you can see them so I can cite that correctly. But this is one of the first tools I see is sort of, yes, it uses the GPT APIs in the back end, but what it does is actually creates this like network effect to saying like, okay, here's the prompt, here's the steps I need to take, and then creates multiple other prompts to, break it down into smaller sets of problems. Like here's reading in the data, here's doing the join, here's doing all this. Instead of having one massive problem, then assembles all the steps in the end. It kind of looks like something from like a model builder or workflows approach that you might see just generated with generative AI. So I see these are the first 2 types, and I think this next year we'll see a few more of these sort of novel generative AI models start to come out, and I would keep an eye on this space from there. Now, if you're worried about your job being taken, I definitely recommend checking out this video from Luke Barousse, who kind of talks about how he thinks that data analysts will actually have more work because of generative AI rather than less work. So check that out if you're worried about that. I think he has a really good take on all of this. Now, I mentioned the modern geospatial data stack. I think that's another thing we'll start to see. And this mainly the point here is that if you look at the modern data stack itself, you can see there's a mix of proprietary tools and open tools that you can use to intermingle and use in your workflows. And I think a lot of people are starting to see that is that you're using open in some spaces, whether that's open languages or open tools or whatever that might be, to actually process and work with your geospatial geospatial data, I think that's going to translate over into our space and start to have this mix of saying, hey, I do have some of these proprietary tools, but I also want to use these open tools. How can we create that sort of mixed system that benefits the areas that I need? I'm getting poor performance here. Is there something else I could do? So I would keep an eye on this, as well as this idea of the modern geospatial data stack really starting to evolve. And there's a lot of development happening in this areas too. I've mentioned the cloud optimized file formats for geospatial, different things like DuckDB, Apache Sedona, even using tools like DBT, lots of different stuff like that. There's a lot we can do with this. This is one area I plan to explore more over the course of this year, is how can these modern data stack tools really be impactful for geospatial work, and how can you intermingle those, and ultimately how you can learn them. And that leads me into my final big prediction for 2024, which is the expansion of continued learning. If you're like me, I went through a geography university program. I'm sure many of you did that as well, or are doing that. That's sort of the path that has existed for learning these different tools, outside of a few Udemy courses or maybe online guides. And that's kind of why I started actually doing all of this, is because I know there's a really fractured space of how do you learn this different type of stuff. There's no roadmaps, there's no clear way to do this different stuff. And honestly, I think continued learning will start to expand, whether that be through courses or certifications or more people contributing and writing. I'm already seeing that pick up on LinkedIn and sharing these different resources. But I think now you'll start to see that as a primary way or a core way of people actually learning these different tools, whether that be inside academia or outside in the workplace. So continued learning, I know, is just kind of growing everywhere. It's been booming after the pandemic, but I actually start to see this really continuing to grow quite a bit for geospatial in next year. So the other cool part about generative AI is actually some of these customized GPTs. I know that's the same thing over and over, but I think they're just called custom GPTs. You do have to have access to the paid version of the OpenAI's ChatGPT, but there actually are, you can program these GPTs to do a little bit more than just their kind of broad focus. So I've actually put one together here. As you can see, I've actually put different information into it, like a history of my blog post and some of the transcripts from these videos, to say, here's the way to think about things, or here's how to organize these ideas or create a learning plan or stuff like that. It's not perfect, but it's out there if you want to try it and give it a shot. So I'll send a link to that and you can actually check that out as well. So that's it. I think these are the 4 areas to watch in 2024. We can check back this time next year and see if any of these actually came true. I have no idea. I could get 100%, I could get 0%, but I think these are some of the most likely things to happen in this modern GIS geospatial space. So thanks for tuning in. If you want to check out what I thought about 2023, here's the video over here and you can check that out. So thanks again for watching. If you like this video, please like it. If you want to subscribe, that would be great. It always helps with the algorithm. So I greatly appreciate it, and thank you for checking it out.